Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, God's word. Let's begin here. Let your conversations always be full of grace. Let your conversations be full of grace, seasoned with salt. When they're full of grace and they're seasoned with salt, we can have good conversations, godly conversations, conversations that we can walk away from and say that was peaceful. That was peaceful. I have peace about what I said and how I said what I said, not contingent on how they responded. Full of grace, seasoned with salt. And so we want to have a conversation. We want to talk about kingdom politics. Kingdom politics. And so I just said the word politics. So again, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt. And so many of us, right, we walk around when it comes to politics, we're either overwhelmed, right, confused, I have nothing I can do about this, or perhaps we're underwhelmed just by this is ridiculous, I don't even want to be part of it. Some of us, maybe we're saying we're over it, right? I'm done, like this is just stupid, like I'm not having this conversation, so pastor, I'm actually offended by you by making me have this conversation and think about it, right? We're over it, right? I'm voting for who I'm voting for and we're just moving on. Some of us feel like we're above it. We're above it, like we have control of this. We know what to say, how to say it, why we're saying what we're saying. We're above it. We have control. Right? Some of us are really confused. Some of us are really hurt. And a lot of us that I'm talking to right now, I think we're disengaged. We're disengaged in the conversations that we are having, the conversations that are full of grace and seasoned with salt. And so kingdom politics, last week, if you're with us, if you tuned into our YouTube devotional, you received a lot of the truth that we were sharing. And so today, as we have this conversation, I want to talk about God in politics. And specifically, I want to say this, God's sovereign rule over all of creation. Is that true? Has God created and is God ruling over His creation? How has He chosen to rule over His creation? Some of you have heard these statements said in the past, so maybe as you're working through just politics and what am I supposed to do, and God's sovereign rule, that God rules over the spiritual world and God rules over the temporal world. Right? The spiritual world is the eternal world. The temporal world is a world that we hear now. And when we think about the spiritual and the temporal, we might think about the church. The church is over the spiritual. The church proclaims, right, truth. The church, right, is in charge of the spiritual realm. And the government, the way God has established His creation, is in charge of the temporal realm, specifically to preserve it and to protect and to promote. And think about that in light of neighbors. The government, you might agree with this, you might not, right? In God's creation, the government exists to preserve our neighbors, to protect our neighbors, and to promote our neighbors. The church, right, is there to proclaim truth. The church in the spiritual realm in God's creation, God's people, right, the church, the means of grace. Right, bringing the gospel, bringing forgiveness, bringing peace with God, right, the means of grace. The government, if you will, right, would be the means of ethics, And ethics, not just what I think is right in my own eyes, right, but in what God thinks is right, God's will for His creation. Right, I hope you're with me right now. The church, right, brings the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the forgiveness of sins, the spiritual realm. Right? The government brings the law, right? And again, it seems like this or that, right? But we're not saying that. We're saying this is how God's creation all works together. Right? The church, justification. We've been justified by grace in Jesus. The government, justice. Right? The church, the spiritual realm in God's creation, right, talks about this, the vertical relationship. Right? The government talks about the horizontal relationships. Again, how we treat our neighbors. And so Jesus, and here's where I'm going in the conversations I've been having with God through this and trying to see clarity. Jesus said this, right? Love God, love your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. And the question is this stand apart from this? Love God, love your neighbor. They're different, but yet they're the same, and one influences the other. One influences the other, and the question would be, which one influences the other? Right? When Jesus said the first is this, love God. Love God. And what's going to flow out of that, and you can't divorce the two, you can't separate the two, because the way you love God is going to be shown in how you love your neighbor. I hope you're with me right now. All right? There's a holy distinction, but yet there's a holy engagement. There's a holy tension. To love God, to love your neighbor. Which one influences which one? Right? And so as I asked that, this is what I said last week. Right? Our values as Christians, as children of God, need to influence our politics. Okay? Right? Our ethics, how we love our neighbors. There's a teaching I heard a couple weeks ago. It was a Harvard professor. I think I mentioned this last week, but he's talking about happiness. Happiness. And so think about this in the government realm, in God's creation, as we talk about promoting our neighbors, right? Preserving our neighbors, protecting our neighbors. What does that look like? He said that happiness, according to research, is found in those that do not have contempt towards their neighbors. So again, kingdom politics, engage in the conversation. Happiness is found in those that do not have contempt towards their neighbors. Not just hate, but contempt. That my neighbors don't have worth, but that my neighbors don't have any value. And you feel that way towards people. And a lot of us have people that we really struggle with, right? And so if you have contempt towards that person, if you've given in the contempt towards people in your life, past people, people in your family, right? Are you really going to have happiness? Right? That's wisdom speaking. That's research speaking. That's science speaking. Right? That's the left-hand kingdom, if you will, in God's creation. And so our faith, Jesus, right? If you're with me, what did he say about what I just said? What research said? He said to love your enemies. Bless your enemies. Right? Bless those who persecute you. Pray for them. Learn to forgive them and trust them to God. Right? Jesus never devalued any part of his creation. Influence. Right? What I'm asking, what I hear God asking us to do, he's urging us to have conversations, right? Full of grace, seasoned with salt. We can't be scared, right? And I know we can't control how other people respond to our conversations, but if we can be full of grace, right, and season it with salt to preserve that relationship, that conversation that we're going to have, right, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, right? We need to have conversations, and we need to engage our values, God's will for his creation, right, into politics. I'm learning how to have the conversation. I hope you're learning how to have this conversation. We're here for you, and we'll be with you again next week. But that's what I want to engage you in. Colossians chapter 4, verse 6. Let that settle in and understand that our faith does need to influence, right, all aspects of our life, and certainly when it comes to government. I pray that we step up as children of God, as disciples of Jesus. We have conversations seasoned with salt, full of grace. Because when we do that, that's God pleasing, and that's loving God, and that's loving our neighbors. So let's get out there and let's engage.